Yo yo yo, this is Sami, aka Alajärvelä, aka HCT, Peaster, whatever. You know me. Yeah, I was requested to make a tutorial on just the basic interface of FL Studio and maybe giving some tips on how to utilize some of the features like the Pianoroll or the playlist view. So let's have a look. Let's just start off by opening or checking out what we have here in what's called the sequencer or the pattern window, because it says pattern up here. Okay, so for starters we can see that we have pattern 1 open because it says here the name. If we want to change between patterns, we click this one and we can see we only have this one pattern, we don't have any other in the project, so we can create a new one with first empty or next empty, or just by hitting plus and then it prompts for a new name and the color. And I want to emphasize, please use these because in your projects when you end up with 20 something patterns, it will be difficult to find the correct one without browsing through each of them every time. So do yourself a favor, give them proper names. So for example, baseline, and if you color code them, it's also going to make your job way more easier in the long run. So then just hit enter and now we have a new pattern. So we can jump between these, and as you can see, this one is now empty. This is the step sequencer, so we can draw in steps. If we say had a drum sample here, for example, let's find a kick like this. So now we have a kick hitting on the first beat every time. Simple. But if we want to create something a bit more complex than just 1/4 notes, then we have to open up the Pianoroll. And as you can see here, I already have some data written into these patterns. So we can either click one of these to get the Pianoroll open, or we can right click and hit up the Pianoroll, or then we can hit the right key, which is F7, to open up the Pianoroll window. And as you can see here, we just have some very basic notes written out here. Nothing special, but this is basically what the Pianoroll looks like. And this is the pattern window. And in the pattern window, you will be finding all your synthesizers you add into the project and all your audio samples. Currently, we have one kick audio sample, as you can see here. And then we have some massive plugins, but they aren't organized at all. And when we end up with a ton of different audio samples and a ton of different synthesizers, like this for example, it also gets very messy. And for example, with our synthesizers, we might want to group them by what they are representing. So for example, these both are bass lines. So we'll click the marker here next to the name and holding shift, left shift, and clicking another one, you can select multiple instances. So for example, we want to select both of these synthesizers in order to group them. So highlight both which you have, and then go into the channel window and then group selected. You can also find the short key is Alt plus G. So hit those and give the group a name. So for example, we'll call them bass synths, like that. So now we can click this menu open and we'll see all the groups we have created. So all will show obviously all the pattern instances you have, synthesizers and samples, and unsorted will show which aren't sorted yet. So for example, these are going to be our drums. So we want to hit Alt and G and write drums. This is how you keep your projects tidy. Bass and drums. Okay. If you hit up the playlist with F5 or through View and Playlist here, you can see I have already drawn in the bass pattern I created. So we can just highlight this one with the pen tool selected, and we can just draw in some new instances. But if you want to create some alternative versions based on this one, instead of having to copy paste, because for example we have 2 tracks here, we could have 4 or 5 stacked on top of each other to layer the sounds. So instead of copying and pasting all the tracks, which is going to be tedious, you can just hit the small marker here on the top left corner of the pattern, and we can now hit make unique. And here, for example, this is also the first pattern. We didn't give it a name initially, so we can still rename it or give it a color. You can still find that option also here, rename and color. It's F2 as found in all Windows machines also. But yeah, this menu is very nifty, and from here what we're going to be using mostly is make unique. So when you hit make unique, it creates a new instance of the same pattern. So we open up the pattern, it's called now pattern 2. It took the previous name and added a number after it. So as you can see, it still has the same melodies and sounds and everything as pattern 1. But now if we do some modification, like transpose everything up by 3 steps, you'll now hear. And if we check pattern 1, it's still the same. So this is the most easiest way to create variation. I know some people like to write very long patterns that might spread over like 16 bars or 32 bars, but then reusing them isn't going to be that easy. So I prefer to keep everything into shorter bars, and then write the variation into each different pattern, so it's easier to copy paste over and modify them. And yeah, it just keeps you more inspired and easier to be on the go. What about next? Well, next we could still check some new stuff about the pattern. So let's create a new instance called drums, like this. Open up our drums, put on a kick on each note. It's a bit weak kick. We might want to change that up to something more fun. Well, this is nice, for example. So now we have the kick window highlighted. It has this green marker here, and when we press the middle mouse button down, it will now replace the kick 0 sample with the kick 05 SP sample, like this. So now when we check, we have a new one. So yeah, you can click the samples here in the browser window, or you can press up and down to scroll through the samples. But if you want to try out a sample in the context you have already made, so if you have a whole drum beat and you only want to change out one sample or try something new, then pressing the middle mouse is a very fast way of changing samples. But yeah, if you right click a pattern here or an audio clip, you can open up the Pianoroll like said earlier. You can rename and give color to channels, and then it also has this fill, which enables you to add some notes instantly. So if we happen to have a very long clip and you don't want to draw in because it's going to get confusing, you can just hit fill in each and it's going to do just that. But we don't want that, so we'll delete that with Control X, like so, and we'll just stick with the defaults, which is 4 beats or 8, for example. But yeah, let's make a quick beat. I haven't even checked out what these samples are, so I have no idea what it's going to sound like. Nice enough. Okay, so yeah, the dials here closest to the name, they are the volume dials, and the dials left to them, it's the panning dial or a knob or whatever. So for example, we can set some panning on the claps because we have 2 claps stacked, and we'll get some variation with that. Then we'll add one new hat, like this, for example. And now I'm going to show you how swing works in FL Studio. So I know in Ableton at least you can there are different presets for swing. You can do the percentage swing also, but there are also different kinds of names for different rhythms. FL Studio doesn't have that. It only has one swing what's it called, slider that you can adjust that gives it a certain percentage of swing. So if you, for example, fill in all the notes here, we can hear with 0 swing, very straight out, nothing special. Then if we add like 37%, it goes more like dakka 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 da. And if we now put the swing back to 0, go to Pianoroll, it will actually convert what we drew in the step sequencer into the Pianoroll. And as you can see, each note are hitting exactly on its timing where it should be hitting. But if we do that again, except with some swing on, like the 34%, about the same we had last time, send now to the Pianoroll, you'll see that every second note hits where it's supposed to hit, but then every second note, it has now the swing applied. So this is a way of how you can manually adjust the swing afterwards. So for example, I don't want this. For example, something like this would work very nicely. And now we can drop the the swing back to 0, so that it won't be affecting all the other things we have. Because if we have swing selected on one pattern and we go to another pattern, we'll see that the swing is still being applied. So it's being applied to the whole project, and you might not want that. So that's why, if you want to play with the swing here, because it's the easiest than manually drawing it in, that you should convert that to MIDI notes, because currently these are just pattern blocks and not actual MIDI notes. So you'll want to adjust that back to 0. So this is currently the beat we now have with the applied swing. Okay, very simple, very straightforward. Then let's have a look on the playlist and what we can find here. So yeah, I already demonstrated how you can make unique to create different kinds of clips based on what you already have. But up here we have the different tools we're going to be using. So here's Snap to Grid, the first selection here. You can see that you can set the snapping to beat or a bar or half a beat or even steps if you want to get very picky on the timings. So for example, we have now 1/4 of a step selected. So you can create very specific timings with these, and it also works for audio clips or whatever. But you might not want that. You'll keep it to something sane that's harder to mess up or easier to draw in, like 1/4 of a beat. It's usually what I keep it at. But then if you have samples like reverse crashes or effects you need to adjust very specifically, and you don't want to bother with changing the snapping, you can also just hold Alt, and then when you are dragging a sample, it'll let you drag it wherever basically. So holding Alt basically anywhere in FL Studio, in the Pianoroll or in the playlist, it'll allow you to get off the snapping temporarily. If you hold Shift, then it'll create a new instance of what you're working with. So if we have this selected, yeah, by the way, you can also see what you have selected by what it's saying up here. So if we click on the drums, now we are pasting in drums. If we click on the bass pattern, we are drawing bass patterns. Or if we click in individual samples, we are drawing individual samples. You can also change it from here. So just select what you want to draw in and click it once, and you are golden. So that's the draw tool. It's the shortcut is P. Then next is the paint tool, which is B. The difference with draw and paint is that paint just basically copies over and over for how long you paint it, while as the draw tool only creates one instance that you can drag around. And with the paint tool, you seriously want to use the Snap to Grid, because your clips is going to be everywhere and you have to manually readjust them to be on time again. Then we have the delete, which is D as delete, and you just click on clips and it'll remove them. Very simple. Then mute. Like you saw earlier, I muted a few clips. There's also some multi-button mouse shortcuts in the settings you can enable. So for example, if you drag from left, it'll sometimes mute the clips. I'm not actually entirely sure how it works, but that's something you might want to investigate if you want to use gestures with your mouse. Then next we have slip, which is actually, I found it very recently, like last year or something, and it's one of my favorite tools with FL Studio. So it's basically like changing the starting position. Let's try to find some fun clip I could demonstrate it with. So for example, okay, here we have vocals here now, and I don't necessarily like the timing how it goes now, so we'll use the slice tool. I'm holding shift now to draw a straight line. If you don't hold shift, it'll make you do all kinds of wonky things, and you need to pull it through the clip in order to chop it up. But if you hold shift, you just need to click and it'll chop up the samples like so. Okay, so if I, for example, want my sample timing to look like this, for example, but I don't necessarily like the current point in the sample where we are, I can use the slip tool. So without adjusting the starting position of the clip, we can adjust the starting position of the sample to create something that sounds like this, for example. And I'm now also holding Alt, so or snapping still applies here. You can see if I don't hold Alt, it'll only drag in certain intervals, which is a fourth of a beat currently. So if we have Alt, it won't be snapping. Okay, so we can do something like that very easily in FL Studio with the slip tool. So very nifty, learn to use it. Then, like I said, we have the slice tool. So by default, it also uses snapping. If you hold shift, it'll let you draw a straight line vertically, and if you hold Alt, it'll let you reposition outside of the snapping. So very cool, very nifty again. The slice tool shortcut is C, I think. Yeah, C. Lastly, we aren't going to be looking at the zoom or the playback because, well, okay, yeah, we can look at them. But E for selection, which is just basically your regular selection tool. Snapping doesn't apply here. It's very freeform. You can either select individual clips like this. It'll select the whole clips in the depending on their length. But you can also select whole channels by clicking the track here. So it'll pick everything throughout the whole project, no matter how long it is, if you select a certain track. So you might want to organize your audio clips here in the playlist depending on how you're going to be selecting them here, possibly. Okay. You can also rename these tracks by right-clicking, rename color. You can also set icons to organize them, or you can set on auto-naming them, which will then name them based on what you have dragged onto the channel. If you don't want to do this, you can also just drag a sample on the track, and it'll now use its color and its name for the track. You can also create child channels. So, for example, if we want to create an additional drum channel, for example, and we want it to be a child channel of the main drums, we would right click this and hit G as in group. So now these two have been grouped together, as you can see, and you can even create a child of a child. No, actually you can't. I just lied. So only one child channel apparently. No, yeah, you can. Just not a child of a child, but you can create several childs for the parent. Muting doesn't apply to several channels unless you hit with Alt. So with Alt you can mute the parent and the childs, which is something I looked for a very long time to figure out how to do. So hold Alt and mute the parent and it'll mute the child also. Also works from child to the parent. What else? Let's see. Here in the menu, edit tools. Yeah, view. Okay. So by holding Control, you can vertically zoom in and out. No, horizontally. Sorry, horizontally by holding Control, and vertically by holding Alt, and it'll resize all the windows like so. And it'll reposition your current view depending on where your mouse is currently. And the same with Alt. So Alt and the mouse up and down will change the channel sizes. And if you have differences in the channel sizes, it's going to get a bit fucky when you resize, because then if you want the smaller channels to be visible, you have to zoom. But then the bigger channels will grow even more in size and it'll look quite dumb. So you might want to use the automatic sizes. So here you can, from the size menu, apply like 100%, which is the default size. You can also use like half the size, and then when you zoom in and out, up and down, it'll still remain the half size. So you'll rather want to use these sizes than manually adjusting the size, because then it's not fixed to anything and it'll just get very fucky quickly. Okay, yeah, time markers. Alt-T, you can add markers, you can create loop points, for example. So if I select here and hit Alt-T, I can name a marker like chorus. I just type out that, but that doesn't matter. So you can, for example, drop it here and you can make it loop or song start or pause or whatever. So if we hit loop, after the clip ends, it'll just jump back like that. It's not very useful, except if you're doing like DJ sets in FL Studio, but you don't want to do that. You can use the performance mode, which is very different, but there you won't really be needing the markers anyway. So the markers are mostly just so that you can write off stuff that is happening, like marking here's the verse, here's the chorus, stuff like that, to make it clearer for yourself. That's the only main benefit I see. I think this covers most parts here in the playlist. Yeah, okay, quickly also the play pause. So it's basically a scrubbing tool. The shortcut is Y, as in play, and you can just hit wherever you want the audio to play back. So it's nifty if you want to quickly preview some section of the song. But it's not very widely used for anything. Oh yeah, one last thing about the playlist. So we have 3 different windows here. It's basically what you are currently focusing on. So for example, we have an audio clip here, and you can stack these on top of each other. It doesn't really matter in that how you have positioned them, and you can also have audio clips here all stacked on top of each other. And if you want to select the right channel, then it might get a bit hard. So you can click and it will sometimes toggle through what you're currently selecting, but not right now because we have selected automation clips. So here in the focus you can decide on what you want to focus on, so it will bring it up front. So now we have audio clips. Now we can select the audio clips here if it were any wider like this, or pattern clips like this. So this is very nifty to know if you have a hard time selecting. And this with the audio clips is especially important because people sometimes don't realize, but you might have accidentally selected stretch, and when you are going to resize audio clips, like if you have a vocal clip and you want to just crop the ending or just have it at a certain size, it's not going to work if you have stretch enabled, which it is by default. I think there's no shortcut to disable enable stretch, which I wish there would be, but there isn't. But if you have stretch enabled, it'll re-pitch the sample. Like this. So it's also very handy when you want to create timings for certain loops. You want to adjust them, warp samples or whatever. So you want to use stretch then, or you can manually do it from the sample window. But it's very important to remember not to have this enabled when you then want to only crop samples. So it's still something I managed to forget time and again. And then there's also zero cross. Zero cross basically means that it won't allow you to resize samples in such a way that the phasing doesn't start from zero. So if you don't have zero cross enabled, you have to make sure yourself that your phasing is going correctly. If it doesn't, you are going to get some popping and clicking, which is very nasty. But basically, without zero cross, there is very little limit on how specific you can be on the timing when you're adjusting samples here. So if we have zero cross, as you can see, no, actually you can't see, the zoom isn't big enough, but it won't let you do all you might wish for. But zero cross is still very important. Have it enabled unless you know what you're doing. Okay, this definitely covers the whole... Yes, cat? Hello, cat. Yeah, this covers the whole playlist. And then we'll have a quick look at the Pianoroll. Oh yeah, if you select a channel here on the playlist, it'll change your current highlight in the pattern window accordingly. So it's very nifty to navigate this way, in my opinion. But yeah, to open up the Pianoroll, you can hit F7, or you can right click the channel like so. And here also the control mouse scroll zooming applies, but not the one with Alt. So Alt will adjust the velocity by default for your sample. So for example, if I have my mouse here, press Alt and use the mouse, you can see it'll adjust the velocity down here. So you'll want to be careful with that. Yeah, so the Pianoroll is split in two. On the upper side, we have the MIDI notes we currently have. We have the piano view here, so you can see the notes. We are currently working in the 3rd octave in the E key, and then here in the bottom, we then have different options on what we want to focus on. So we can have note panning, velocity release, aftertouch, fine pitch, and then we have some automation clips. But usually you won't be needing these, so try not to click these because disabling them is a bitch in FL Studio. But yeah, default is velocity here. You might want to play with something else, but usually you won't be needing it unless you actually want to adjust the velocity of each note specifically. So you can just drag it down, hide it, whatever. Okay, hello cat. No, don't eat that. Mike, please no. So here in the Pianoroll we have very similar options as we had in the playlist. So we also have the snapping here you can set. We also have the same options here. We also have the draw and the paint tool, the delete, the mute, the slice. So it's not that very different, but then we have some additional tools. So we have a whole tool option actually here. So here you can find riff machine, which generates you based on some algorithms, some notes. You can adjust the algorithm also a bit. Legato, articulating, quantizing. For example, if you record some live playing into MIDI notes, you might want to quantize them just to make sure that you are staying on time. Then you have actually quantize. So quick quantize is just it's automatic and you can't adjust it. Quantize allows you to manually set the quantizing, or you can even use templates for that. Quick chop for chopping up audio clips, gluing back for creating continuing notes, ARPs, strums, flams, whatever. We don't usually need these, you can just create them yourself, but whatever. And then maybe my favorite tool is found on the other menu here. So it's the chord tool, which basically has all the chords you're going to need and a whole ton of different scales. Just your basic minors, majors, augmented and whatever. So for example, when I'm writing a house, I very often use the blues scale. I pick the scale, and now when I draw in a note, it'll draw the whole scale in one octave. So for example E, and here is the blues scale in E. So I very often like to keep this in the background so I can actually see the notes that belong to the current scale I'm writing in. But this creates a problem now, because if we go out in the project, we'll see actually that we have a fuck ton of notes here that we don't want to hear. It's going to be terrible. Like, please no, don't do that. So what we can do, we could always mute the notes, but they are going to be interfering with what we're working with. So you might accidentally click a note here, or if you want to draw a note and you have the muted note here behind it, it's going to get messy and very annoying. So what I like to do is open up the menu, go to helpers, and here enable ghost channels. The shortcut is Alt V, but you don't really need the shortcut because I don't see no reason to not have this enabled all the time. So just enable ghost channels, and now when we go to another channel that is in the same pattern, like we can add something here, something like a layer. We aren't even actually going to use it, but we'll draw in the scale in E here on a few octaves so that we can work with it. We'll stretch it out a bit like so, and now when we open up, we'll actually see that we have the notes here, but we can't interact with them. So that's very nice. We can see the notes that are belonging to the current scale we're trying to work with. Okay, another issue. I still have this selected and I'm too lazy to go to the menu and disable it. So I'll hit Shift and N as for none, and now we are drawing individual notes again and not whole chords and scales. But yeah, very nifty. So just the basic menu in the playlist and chord, and let your imagination flow. This is what I use. This is the most theory I know. It's through this tool. So you can learn the minors or some scales through this menu. It's very, very nifty. Use it unless you know all the chords and scales. Okay, another thing here in the view menu, no, helpers actually, there's the background waveform. So I often use this when I'm trying to figure out the melody of some loop or some vocal clip, for example. So we can drag in some sample, currently it's in the wrong BPM for a project, so if we drop the BPM so that it matches 120, you can see that it fits actually. It's 2 bars long. The vocal will be dropped in, and now we have the waveform here. So if you're having a hard time figuring out the timing of something specifically, you can use this one. So for example, you can see it's not all on the exact beat, so if you want to recreate the melody, this makes it way easier. And like you can see, it follows you no matter where you are scrolling in which octave, so it's very nifty, but you might not always want to have that enabled, so helpers and background waveform, Alt N, like so. Those are the basic shortcuts also for the playlist, I guess. You can also just hit Control A to select everything, E for regular selection, and if you want to pitch stuff up, you can hold Shift and hit the arrows up and down, left and right, or if you want to move them in bigger intervals, like a whole octave up, you can hold Control and then up and down, or yeah. I think this covers everything. If you guys have any questions about the default interface in FL Studio, specifically the pattern window or the playlist window or the Pianoroll, I'm more than happy to answer. So submit any question you have to me in IRC or YouTube or wherever, and I'll try to get to them. Yeah, have a great evening. Bye.